wanted the family to know the reason why. It wasn't because I didn't love my son and didn't want to take care of him. I just couldn't. And I wrote a letter, and I was still at my parents' home, and I had left the phone number, and the mother called, and the first question she asked, she said, "Do you want him back?" And my response was, "I wish I could. I just can't take care of him."
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today you're going to meet Yvonne. She called me from here in Washington, D.C. Yvonne is a birth mother in reunion with her son after more than 40 years apart. She shares the loneliness of her pregnancy, her desire to keep her baby versus her inability to do so, the moment she came face to face with her son's adoptive mother, and her search to find the man he grew up to be. Yvonne is launching a new podcast, Birth Mothers Real Talk, where other women like herself can share stories openly in a safe place. But before we get to her podcast, this is Yvonne's journey. Hey, real quick, I just wanted to share my appreciation for a new Patreon donor, and you'll never guess who it is. It's last week's guest, Sari. She told me in a message that she had been meaning to contribute for a while, so I thanked her for taking action to be supportive of the Who Am I Really podcast. If you've been meaning to contribute, take a moment to do it right now. Go to patreon.com/WAIReally to show your support for more adoptee stories coming to light. You may remember episode number 136, Your Absence Has Gone Through Me, with Anne-Marie, a birth mother. Near the end of the episode, I commented that I would love to interview more natural mothers, but that I didn't feel equipped to do so as a man and an adoptee because I didn't think I could do the stories justice. I said, I think it's really important that someone initiate a podcast where natural mothers like Anne-Marie can tell their stories too, like adoptees can share their journeys here. After that episode, I got an email from Yvonne that read, "Damon, your last podcast was my confirmation that I need to do a podcast for natural mothers. I found my son 2.5 years ago after 45 years. Since November of 2020, Yvonne and I have been working on her new show, Birth Moms Real Talk, for the audience of birth mothers out there that have been wanting to share their own stories. But right now, Yvonne would like you to hear her story. Yvonne grew up in Petersburg, Virginia, 25 miles south of Richmond. She was a country girl who grew up on a farm, raising pigs, chickens, and growing vegetables and wheat for bread. She said she laughs at what passes for organic today based on how she grew up. Her family was self-sustaining. Everything they grew and raised, they lived on.
I joke and say that my task before I went to school in the morning was gathering the eggs and milking the cow. And my first store-bought milk was when I went to college, and it tasted so strange, and people were looking at me. It's like, no, I'm used to the real thing that came straight from the cow, but that was something completely different.
Yvonne's father worked in civil service at Fort Lee Military Base, and her mother worked at home, maintaining the farm and the family once her children were born. She was a quiet woman, and if you didn't focus on her, you might not even know she was in the room. Quite the opposite of Yvonne's vibrant personality, in my opinion. She described herself as always being an inquisitive person, asking questions and wondering why things were the way they were. The youngest of 3 children, Yvonne considers herself a tomboy.
Because there's always boys in the neighborhood, so I played the marbles, I rode the bike. In fact, quite frankly, my brothers would bet against their friends. I bet you can't beat my sister in riding a bike, but I could.
Is that right? They would bet against their friends in favor of you. That's kind of funny. Good for them.
Yes, yes. So I grew around mostly boys in the neighborhood, so I always felt as if I could do I could do what boys did or whatever.
Yvonne went to high school in the 1960s in the rural South. She did well in her studies, joining the Honor Society and making great grades, but she was only one of 20 black students who desegregated what had been a white school.
So that was a very turbulent time, but at the same time, it was a time that I really stood, I guess, my ground and for my rights. And that was the time that I wanted the very best education. Because my intent was to go to college and, quite frankly, be a doctor in Africa. And here I am now, working globally.
That's amazing. Wow.
Mm.
What do you remember about the struggle of desegregating a school in the 60s in rural Virginia?
A lot of it is coming back now during the turbulent times that we're in, because that was the day, the time of the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1965 that gave us the right to go to the other school and the opportunity before separate but equal. And it was standing and really going through being called names and things thrown at us simply because we just wanted an education. We weren't trying to start anything and so forth. So protests that were last summer or just continual, that whole system. And it did bring back a lot of memories. It's like, have things really changed since 1965, this systemic racism? And that's true. That is a true thing that I have seen before my eyes. I have.
Wow. I'm always thankful for those who've come before me, that because the people who endured
That's true.
that
Yeah.
kind of struggle and strife have made it possible for me to be even as accepted as I am, let alone have the opportunities that I have. And there's a big difference, right?
Absolutely.
You can be,
Yeah.
sort of accepted in society, like, yeah, he's over there and he's not bothering me and I'm not going to hurt him. And then there's actually opportunity. After high school, Yvonne went to Lincoln University, the school that originated as the very first historically black university in the United States in 1837 in Pennsylvania. Going from rural Virginia's farm life to that university 2 states away was a huge culture shock. At 18 years old, Yvonne had never even spent a night away from home, and there she was, launching her collegiate studies. She was scared to death, to use her words, but she desperately wanted the opportunity to achieve more. Yvonne attended Lincoln on scholarship and took jobs on campus in the lab, worked as a trainer, and started a business, kind of a precursor to Uber, while she was there. There were a few dollars of scholarship money left over, so Yvonne bought a car and shuttled people to Philadelphia to the airport or bus station, ride-sharing multiple passengers who needed a ride for a few dollars a person. Yvonne wanted to be a physician in Africa, so she studied pre-med biology and chemistry, took summer classes at Virginia State University when she was back for the summers in Petersburg, and graduated 1 year early in only 3 years.
I finished my studies in 3 years because I actually had been accepted into an early admission into medical school. Rutgers University in New Jersey and Medical College of Virginia in Richmond, Virginia. And so I had finished Lincoln and I just had to go back in the next year to get my degree to get into medical school. So I got some money to go to medical school, but not enough to really get in and go and enter in it. So that was 1973 that I finished at Lincoln, and that was the year I became pregnant.
So what did you do after college then, leading up to your pregnancy now? Tell me what happened after college.
Well, actually, I became pregnant in 73, which was my last year on college campus. And so essentially that was like maybe January. So my son was born October of that last year of college after I finished my studies. And so after getting my degree the next year, that I was an analytical chemist for 3 years, then became a stockbroker, and then went into my own business, which I've been in for the last 32 years.
Wow. So It's my understanding that you got pregnant in your second year and maintained the pregnancy while studying and still graduated early. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's amazing. Wow.
It was a journey, the thing of it when I found out I was pregnant, I'd really had finished my studies. I had to go back and take my comprehensive exam, and my son was born that October of that year. I ended up graduating that next May. And then that's when I went into a corporate job actually at a research and development lab as an analytical chemist. That was my first job after college.
Fascinating. Yvonne's son's father was someone she knew from Petersburg, Virginia. He had been in Vietnam for 2 to 3 years. She said when he returned from the Vietnam War, he was not the same person he was when he left. Like so many veterans of war, he struggled with a variety of things re-entering life at home. He was in and out of different living situations and was trying to sort himself out, and it was around that time that they reconnected.
So that was the only time that we sort of got back together my last year of college, and that was when I did become pregnant.
And what did you think when you found out that you were pregnant?
Well, my first thought was, wow, first of all, I didn't know. I didn't miss my cycles. And actually, it was that springtime of 73 that I was back at home and again on the farm. And I was doing something on the farm and I felt the cramp. It's like, okay, that's different. And when I went to my doctor and that's when he would say, well, yeah, you're feeling a cramp. You're expecting. And so I didn't know until that time. So at the time when it's what did I think? It's like, okay, what am I going to do? I reached out to the father, and quite frankly, he was not in a situation of really even knowing what I was saying to him. And so it was thinking in terms of what will I do? I'll note that my doctor actually was my mentor of helping me, and I worked in the local hospitals a couple of summers with his recommendation because he knew I was pre-med. And so his question was, knowing number one, I had been accepted to medical school, it's like, well, what are you going to do? I said, oh no, let me go home and talk to my parents. And so when I went home and talked to first my mom, and as I said before, my mom, you really wouldn't know she's in the room. So when I said to her, I said, Mom, I'm pregnant. And it was silence. And I don't say that was different because my family is a very non-communicative family of not talking or responding. So it was like, did you hear me, Mom? And still really nothing. So as I said, my dad worked in civil service at Fort Lee. And so he was at work at that time. So the next day when I saw him, I said to him, and it was like I wasn't saying anything at all and like not acknowledging what I said. So I called my doctor, went back in and said, I don't know. I'm not getting any response from my parents. And at that situation, like I said, I was just finishing college and I didn't have a job. And so I didn't know what I would do, but I knew I would need help. And at that particular point, I wasn't getting any help. And so it was trying to figure out what's the next step.
That's really fascinating. So if I have this straight, your own doctor was also a mentor to you in your studies because you're studying to be a doctor. And yet you're now approaching him with a personal challenge that you've gone home, told your parents, each individually. Neither one of them has said a thing. Now you're back at the doctor trying to get guidance. That's fascinating. So what did you guys discuss?
Well, again, he said, what I want to do. I said, I would like to have my child, but I don't have any help. I don't know what to do. because there's no one in helping or assistance in any way, or not getting a response from my parents. And I always knew during growing up, it was like just not the family of talking about things. And I expected a response, but I never got a response at all.
After speaking with her parents a second time, but not getting any meaningful response, Yvonne didn't know what she was going to do. Returning to her doctor and mentor, he told her that he knew of a family in his neighborhood who had been trying to have a child, and he thought their home would be a good place for her son. Adoption was on the table for discussion.
And I have to say, he was my angel. And I use that word angel because he stepped in. He took care of everything, because the thing with the care, I didn't have insurance. So he took, really didn't charge anything. He was truly just an angel of stepping in and was there for me when actually it wasn't my family that was there for me.
Wow. That's really amazing. Not everybody, as you know, has had anything remotely resembling that kind outpouring from a professional. That's really nice to hear. Yvonne made the decision to carry her son to term and place him in adoption with the family the doctor recommended. Yvonne wasn't getting any help from her mother about what to expect during her pregnancy. She didn't get any guidance from her mom about what her body would feel like when the time came to deliver, and she was very much alone through it all.
Well, realizing I'm having pains, so something's up. So maybe this is the day. Not really knowing, like, okay, 5 minutes apart or whatever, and I really wasn't timing. And again, I bring back to probably a rural area. I lived maybe about 10 miles from the hospital. And so just thinking with the severity of the pains, I said, I think it's time. And my older brother was there on the farm, and I asked him to take me to the hospital. And so went to the hospital, into the emergency room, and they examined me, but said, I guess it wasn't time, and sent me home. Okay. So then maybe about 3 or 4 hours later, well, meanwhile, he left. My mother did not drive.
Wait, your brother left in the 3 hours that you were at the hospital?
My brother left.
Mm-hmm.
And so I drove myself, Damon.
Back to the hospital?
To the hospital.
Mm. And so you had to check yourself in, and you went through this alone?
And Dr. B, a doctor, he was called. So he took me up to labor and delivery. And he came in and delivered my son. And he had already notified the hospital that I would be placing. And when I said he's an angel, this is 1973. There were no private rooms in hospitals, but somehow he got me a private room, and meaning that it was another bed, but no one ever came in there. And because he had set that up that way. I did not see my son when he was born. I heard him, had good lungs. And so after I delivered, I was taken back to my hospital room, and I was there for 3 days, basically by myself. Didn't have any visitors. And when I went home, my son ended up staying a few days later. But I went home, and basically when I could be released, that I called someone to pick me up and take me home. And no one at home ever said anything about it. Didn't mention or ask me whether I had a boy, girl. I announced I have a son. I remember doing that. I have a son. To my family.
Gosh, so many pieces to this. How did you announce it? Did you just blurt it out? Like, y'all aren't asking me, so I'm just telling you. Like, how did that go?
Yeah, and when I came into the house, I had a son. That's how I did it. Nothing ever was ever said to me again, or questions, or anything.
Hmm.
Anything.
Do you, I'm thinking of so many things. You sat there in that hospital for 3 days, and for 3 days you stayed there. That means, and you couldn't just drive yourself home. That means somebody came and got the car, but did not actually come in to see
Mm-hmm. Because it was parked in the emergency parking lot.
you. How did you feel about your family in those times?
Well, while I was at home, maybe before I went to college, and I say this statement, I make it very succinctly, that I broke out of a dysfunctional system and family that obviously had been there for years. I mean, I'd seen it during elementary school, high school, just the not talking, like not acknowledging, and it wasn't just that time that I was pregnant, but like I said, I was a very good student. And it was not even acknowledging my accomplishment in, honor society. I played in a band, concert band, and recognitions, and not really getting that. So I end up being that person that I would give to myself or validate myself. And so understanding whatever generation, and my parents were older, of that's what they could do or could not do, and felt as if they needed to be there for me. Yes, absolutely. End up learning to understand they just couldn't, you know, just in therapy and all things I've been through the years, just recognizing that they weren't able to give me what I needed. And I didn't get it, even from my older brothers. And they're still living to this day.
Yvonne had completed her studies early in January of 1973. In March, she found out she was pregnant, and her son was born in October. Graduation was May 1974 from Lincoln University, but she didn't need to be back on campus since her studies were complete. From October to May, Yvonne was still at home, and no one was talking about what she had been through. No one asked about the baby boy she had brought into the world.
It was still that alone, trying to deal with it myself, of recognizing that I have a son, and just and to me, I've always been that one when I have to say it out loud. So me announcing and saying out loud that made it real, even though no one was acknowledging it, but it was real to me.
Mm-hmm.
That time itself, back again on the farm, doing farm chores, so I didn't really work that 6 months, but it was coming to terms with the fact I was a mother, just coming to terms with that and wondering about him. A part of I call it the God story about it, because I believe God has such a path for us and he lays it out before us, that during the time of after delivery, again, Dr. B, being that angel, had set up everything regarding the legal signing of papers and so forth, that and that's what I said, I don't know if it was a God thing or just the way it worked. I end up finding the last name of the family who was going to adopt my son. And I wrote a letter, Damon. Back in 1973, they still had phone books with people's phone numbers and addresses. And so I just looked in the phone book for that last name and wrote a letter. I wanted the family to know the reason why. It wasn't because I didn't love my son and didn't want to take care of him. I just couldn't. And I wrote a letter. And I was still at my parents' home, and I had left the phone number. And the mother called. And the first question she asked, she said, "Do you want him back?" And my response was, "I wish I could. I just can't take care of him."
That must have been really hard to say.
Yeah,
It
but it was true.
It also must have been hard to realize that you've got this secondary opportunity and
Yes.
you can't make it happen.
that was that. And I said, when things come before you, they're for a reason. And that gave me that chance to tell the story, because recognizing my doctor could only say a certain amount. And because what he said to me, he shared a little bit about the family. He knew the family. They lived in his neighborhood. They've been trying to have a child, and they would give a good home. And so I suspect, likewise, he probably told them he's known me since I was like 13 years old. She was, finishing college, had finished college, headed to medical school. So I'm suspecting that's what he told them. But I just wanted to just say it, that this fact, it's not because he was not wanted. It was because I simply could not take care of him, and his father was not available either to help in any way.
Wow. Did you appreciate that call from her?
Yes, because when I wrote, I had no clue whether I'd hear anything. I didn't. So yes, I did. So that was great to even have that, and not knowing what's in her mind. Well, one of the first things, of course, is thinking that I wanted to end the adoption, because that was her question. Do you want him back? I was like, I really wish I could. I wrote simply to let you know the circumstance. I wanted you to know, and hopefully you will share with him, to let him know that he was loved, and it's not because he wasn't wanted.
6 months later, Yvonne got her own place, got a job as an analytical chemist, and moved away from home. She continued to try to accumulate life successes, but the experience conceiving a child, delivering her son alone, and not being supported by her family was lingering with her. A piece of her was out in the world without her. I asked what it was like to live her day-to-day life with such a massive secret in her recent past.
Yes. And I'm glad you said secret, because it wasn't something that, of course, I announced every day. There were a few people that came in my life that I would share and said I placed a son. One of the first persons, quite frankly, was someone that we worked together. Actually, one of my, probably after 3 or 4 years, I had moved jobs from being an analytical chemist to a stockbroker. And I was riding with a coworker, and it turned out she had been adopted. And she had, I guess, but it was like a family adoption or something, and she was about to meet or heard of or was learning some things about her birth mom. And we were riding in the car, and as she was driving, I was a passenger, and her statement, she said, I don't understand why my mother placed me in adoption. And my response was, I do. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I do because I did. And I did it because I loved my son and I wanted him to have a good life. So that was one of the first times I shared it.
Wow. That must have been mind-blowing for both of you. One, for her to hear
she had
that
to pull the car over.
Yeah, she's sitting next to a birth mother that she didn't know. And two, you're not saying this to anybody. And for all of a sudden, this wide open opportunity presents itself for you to finally release the valve and admit it to somebody. That's incredible. Wow.
Right. She pulled the car over and she looked at me. She turned and looked at me. Really? Yes. Really. And dang. I told her the story.
That's unreal. Was it a relief to tell somebody?
Oh, yes. And then she wasn't the first, so it wasn't just flashing out, but random times in which there was an opportunity exist. And I can probably say the first time I went public as the birth mother was probably about maybe 6 years after that. I ended up getting married maybe about 7 years after my son was born. Marriage lasted close to 10 years, never had children, had a couple of miscarriages. But after that time, and I did a lot of community work, and I remember being on a panel, and it was regarding adoption is actually, and you may have heard of an organization called One Church, One Child, that churches, mainly black churches, would advocate for is in people adopting children, black children that were in orphanages or whatever. And I was one of the panelists. And that was a question about for is why someone should. And I said, I'm a birth mother. And it was like, and I seemed to just announce, well, I'm a birth mother. It's like, okay. And no one in that whole room or that whole meeting knew that until I announced it and just shared my story. So when opportunity presented itself, I would, but it was pretty much mostly on a one-to-one shared arrangement, shared when we're in a conversation.
As Yvonne was telling her story, it hit me that she knew exactly where her son was. In the 1970s, we couldn't cyberstalk people online and watch them from afar. You had to physically go check on someone to see how they were doing. I wondered if she ever drove by the family's house where her son lived, but she said no. She believed in their right to privacy. Yvonne did take advantage of the state of Virginia's adoption registry, and periodically, when she had life changes, she would update her address and medical information with the state. She knew that when he turned 18, her son could contact the Department of Social Services and ask for her letters and information.
I wanted him to have that. But at the same time, knowing in the area that he was, but thinking too, one of the first things I wanted, Damon, and birth mothers I think relate to this, wanted to see a picture of him. Because my only time, because I said I left about 3 days later. He left a few days after that. And the way we had first set up the placement with the attorney and the signing of the documents is that the law firm who was handling the adoption, a paralegal or someone from the firm, would pick my son up at the hospital. Well, after I got home, after 3 days, I got a call that I was the only one who could pick him up from the maternity ward. So I went back to the hospital to pick my son up from maternity and meet the paralegal in the lobby of the hospital. So I saw my son for the first time and the last time 10 days after he was born.
Oh my God, that is unreal. That must have been so hard to do.
Hardest day of my life.
Because you had to pick him up and hand him off again.
It was the hardest day of my life. But his face was etched in my mind. I remember looking at him and I said, you've got my nose, you've got my eyes, you've got my mouth. I could see that. And that was etched in my mind.
Yvonne thoughtfully, hopefully, continued updating her information with the state for years. But she admitted her main desire was to see a picture of her son. The last memory she had of him was the infant she picked up from the maternity ward and handed off to a stranger in the hospital's lobby. She told me God has taken her on some twists and turns during her journey, and her time as a stockbroker was one of them. She was working out of Richmond, Virginia, only 30 miles from Petersburg, so she would visit home from time to time. Yvonne also had a client assigned to her there in Petersburg, a physician, so she called to make an appointment to introduce herself.
So I came into the building and just announced myself, Yvonne Rivers, here for Dr. So-and-so, and had a seat. And I look up at the desk where the receptionist who had greeted me and said, you'll let Dr. So-and-so know. I looked up and the name tag on the desk was the adoptive mom's name.
No. Are you serious?
Yeah. I'm serious. And it took me 10 seconds. I'm like, where the building was located in the vicinity of what I knew the adoptive parents lived. I put it all together in 10 seconds. And then it was like, it was like almost, I think I was hyperventilating. It's okay, what am I going to do? Because when it came in and announced myself, but it was like, I didn't make an appointment with her. It was with the doctor. And so I said, get yourself together, Yvonne. Stand up. Because behind her was a credenza that had a picture that seemed like a family picture. And the first thought in my mind was, my son is in that picture. I've got to see that picture. I got myself together enough to be able to stand up again and was walking towards the desk when the doctor came out, and I had to go in and see him. I don't know what I said to this man, Damon. I really don't. Because I was just that picture on that credenza. And so when I finished the appointment and I came out and she was still at the desk, I never could get a close look at that picture. But I just wanted to see that picture because I knew he had to be in that picture.
Oh my gosh. That is so crazy. Are you serious?
I'm serious. And that was verified when I ended up meeting my son. I told him this story and I said, was that her? He said yes.
That is unbelievable. You came face to face with the adoptive mother, and she's got a picture of your son behind her that you don't even actually get to see.
I just couldn't. It was too far, but I just couldn't. But I could tell it was a picture seemingly of a family. I said, he's got to be in it.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. At that time, Yvonne would have been about 28 years old. Her son was about 6 years old in that picture that she never saw. Sometime later, after that harrowing incident, Yvonne was married.
We knew each other for maybe a total of 10 years. The marriage lasted for maybe 7.5, 8 years. We ended up having 2 miscarriages, so no children came out of that.
Tell me about your miscarriages. That must have been really difficult. I mean, above the norm, and I don't mean to make light of anyone else's miscarriages. They're all tragic losses, but you have actually delivered a son before that you don't get to raise, and now here you are trying to have other children and you can't. What was that like?
Well, the first thought, quite frankly, was I don't know whether I said it this way or not, but I really felt as if, and I said this one day, that God was punishing me because I had a son and didn't raise him, and I wasn't going to get the opportunity to have others. That was one of my first thoughts.
That must have been really tough. Did your husband try to talk you down from that?
Well, not really. I mean, it's like, and people are at different stages of whatever. The loss itself of the child, because we had always talked about having a family and not being able to, and especially when the marriage ended, it was like at a time of feeling as if not things are just not going my way. That was really a lot.
Of course, I wanted to know what was happening in Yvonne's life when reunion happened for her and her son. She knew where he was raised as a young man, but after high school, there was no way of knowing where he would have ended up. Internet connectivity and social media platforms became part of Yvonne's life in the early 2000s. She searched online, using Facebook and LinkedIn, but never really found anything. At first, Yvonne found her son's younger brother, one of 2 boys born into her son's family after his adoption.
It was June 15th, 2015. Ask me how I remember that. Birth moms always remember. we remember. And, on LinkedIn, you see a picture. Sometimes people have birth dates or not. But at this particular time, and I saw this, and I was searching just the last name, and popped up, and it didn't say a birthday, but it said maybe where you were born at or something like that. So I maybe put in last name, then I would search. I was at Internet Sleuth because I'm looking for my son. And I saw a profile come up, and looked at the face, and it's like, I remember saying, that's my son. I remember calling my best girlfriend, who was my college roommate. We've known each other for over 50 years. I said, I found my son on LinkedIn. And when I found that picture, and if anyone who knows me knows, I'm going to go for it. It's either now or never. So I wrote a message. Well, first you had to connect. And I think I requested a connection. And obviously got it. So I'm thinking, okay, that's got to be him. He accepted my connection. So that same day, I sent a message, kind of cryptic, in other words, in search of son in the subject, and see you from this area. Would you know anything, or something like that? And so the response back was, not sure what you're asking. And I said, okay. So, but I was convinced. He did not acknowledge that. I was just convinced. And I said, if or when you know, or you want to talk, or if this is you, I left my phone number and my email address. And that was 2015. Heard nothing until 2018. Still kept connected to this profile. I was never deleted. So that's what just kept convincing me, this has got to be him. This has got to be him. That same LinkedIn message I sent on April 28th, 2018, nearly 3 years later, a message from that same one I had sent. Hi, I'd like to meet you and talk.
Wow. What did you think when you saw it?
Hallelujah. That was the first thing. Because it was hi, want to meet. Oh, would you be willing to meet or talk? It was will you, like asking if I was. And I said, absolutely yes. That was my response I wrote. Absolutely yes. And I said, you let me know when and where. And so that was in April. And he set a time to call about 4 days later. And so I talked to him on the phone for the first time.
And what was that like? How'd it go?
Wow. My first thought, it was like my mind was crazy. It was about 3 or 4 days in between. It's like, I don't think I slept or whatever. And I was like, what does he sound like? Does he sound like me? Does he sound like me? And I think he sounded like me when he called right on the dot. I think it was like 4:15 he was going to call. 4:15. I was waiting by the phone. And he called and we talked. And it was like, it was just, when you say relief, I feel as if, I felt as if I was holding my breath for 45 years. And I could breathe. And I simply told him the story of circumstance and why he was placed, and about my angel, Dr. B, and all of that. And so that was May, I think, we talked for the first time. And we kept telephone conversations. And we ended up meeting for the first time in person July 5th of 2018.
During the nights before that meeting, Yvonne didn't sleep well at all. Her mind was racing too much, trying to imagine how her reunion would go. All she had was the image of her baby boy's face etched in her mind, the glimpse of a family photo on the office credenza of her son's adoptive mother's desk, and the adult picture from LinkedIn of himself as a man. Reading his profile, she learned that her son had the same major as she did in college, and it turned out he also wanted to be a physician. Nature and nurture were part of his life, but the nature was starting to shine through for Yvonne. Yvonne lives in Washington, D.C. Her son lives in Central Virginia, so they met at a halfway point between them in Fredericksburg, Virginia, at a hotel. At 12 noon on July 5th, Yvonne is in the lobby waiting for her son.
And he was texting me. I'm on my way. And I said this, you'll enjoy this thing. When I said, text me before you come into the hotel lobby because I may pass out. but because I got to get prepared to see you. So, and I was serious. How you gonna respond to your child you haven't seen in 45 years? And so I texted him and I said, well, I'm sitting in the lobby on a sofa facing the fireplace. And so I was getting close to 12 noon, and it's like, I was looking at my clock. I think it was like 10 minutes to. And so, of course, I was facing away from the lobby doors where people come in. And how you can sort of sense that somebody is there. Mm. And I looked around, and he had walked in. And I say it this way. My beautiful brown baby boy, who's now an adult man, 6 foot tall, was just standing there with this big smile on his face. And we just embraced, hugged. I just sobbed. I know I wet his shirt all up, and just was holding each other and embracing, and he just locked his arms around me. And I know people in the lobby were wondering what's up with us, but I just didn't even care.
That is unbelievable. That embrace must have just felt absolutely amazing.
I felt like I could breathe again. So the embrace and hug I don't know how long we held that. And once we released, I looked up at him because he's taller than I am. And I just said, my son. And he said, yes. There's not an amount of money in the world that was priceless. That moment. Priceless.
That's amazing. So what did you guys do after you sort of came down from that moment of finally meeting each other? Did you just sit and talk?
Well, we went upstairs to the suite that I had, and like it's a little area with sofa, TV, and whatever, and sit and talked on the sofa, and holding hands. I brought some things. I brought the letters, copies of letters I'd sent to the social services. Over the years, I always was a writer in journals, so I brought some of those, some family pictures, and so I had that up there to show him all of that, and we just sat and talked for 6 hours. We took a break to go to Cracker Barrel, which is a restaurant, to get some lunch, and I found out that was one of his favorite restaurants, so that was all good. And so we just talked until it was dark and whatever, and he had to go back home. And that was the beginning.
That life-changing event happened in July 2018. Yvonne and her son have seen one another 3 times in person, one of which was October of that same year for his birthday.
And this was important for me, and it turned out for him also, because you as adoptive you don't know your history, especially when you go to medical and so forth. And so I had been working on my family tree for both sides of the family, at least both sides of my dad's family. And I've been compiling over years. So it's a Word document of 30 pages each. For his birthday, I presented to him his family tree, as well as my DNA from Ancestry.com that shows the heritage from coming from and all of that. So he had all of that. So that was my birthday gift.
That's really amazing. How did he receive it?
Oh, he was thrilled. He was thrilled. It was like sitting, because we met again at Cracker Barrel. And he was just thumbing through it the whole time. So, wow, it was like this. And I was telling a lot of narrative history, because we are from the family of Nat Turner in Southampton County, Virginia, and all of that. So just a lot of just family history stories that he now knows his roots.
That's incredible. What a gift. And that's so interesting, too. It's especially poignant, I think, for Black families, because there's the history you have, the history you lost, and the history that you were disconnected from in adoption, right? There's so much to try to convey. And my birth mother, Ann, did the same thing. She was a genealogist, and she was a librarian and just a skilled researcher, and she found all of this family history, and she gifted me a
Mm-hmm.
an album of pictures of herself and
Right.
a whole lineage of our family, and it was just this amazing connection back to history, both
Yes.
personal and global. From
Right.
the days of the Jim Crow South through
Mm-hmm.
the slave trade. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just such an interesting way to get connected back. I can imagine what he felt like to receive that from you. That's really cool.
And it was important for me to have that for him. When you mentioned Flores and one particular artifact that I had by doing my research right in the courthouse of Southampton County, Virginia, and pulling copies of like 1800s and whatever, I found a deed that my great grandfather, after coming out of slavery, being a slave 13 years later, bought land, 30 acres for like $300,
Wow.
and he signed the deed with an X. So that was the kind of thing that I was able to show him,
Wow.
of what, because I truly believe, know where you come from to know where you're going, and realizing he wouldn't have had all of that to know.
So you guys are in reunion still?
Yes, we are.
That's excellent.
Yes, we are.
I'm glad to hear that. So, first of all, Yvonne, I really appreciate you opening up to share your story, because you and I have talked quite a bit, but never in depth about who you are as a birth mom.
Right.
And it has been enlightening to hear your experience, both personally, colleague to colleague, and adoptee to birth mother, right? And so
Right.
I think it's really powerful for adoptees to hear some of the stories of birth mothers, which brings us to your project.
Yes.
So tell me what you've been working on.
Another journey. Another journey. And I think I said to you recently, November 29th of 2020 was when I think I heard your podcast that you had a birth mom on. And I so related to that because I was listening. I would listen to your podcast, and specifically, as you just said, to get the perspective of adoptees. I know my perspective as a birth mother, but I didn't know adoptees. And I'm always part of the journey and the healing and of reunion and getting to know my son and he getting to know me and all of that is to know the perspective. Everybody's different, of course. But when I heard that and I reached out to you, I remember sending an email and you immediately responded. And I said, I want to do a birth mom podcast. I said it just like that. Because I think a comment you said on this show is that you would hope that birth mothers would step up and do that because that's something that's needed. Yeah. And I had realized that before because, and when I use the terminology, I've been in the rooms, meaning birth mom support groups or whatever, even before I found my son, even before, and recognizing that there's a community there, I call it a village there, of being related to each other, but at the same time being able to talk to each other and deal with this journey of healing is serious. I say it that way because it's emotions. We're all wrapped up in the terminology. Even my son and I both will use this roller coaster of emotions. Mm-hmm. It is a roller coaster, and a lot of times you don't know what that day is going to bring, and how do you heal? How do you deal with that? And so conversations around it, and being in rooms and different people and different perspectives and so forth. So this podcast, Birth Moms Real Talk, is going to be exactly that, real talk with birth moms, as well as a discussion about different topics that sometimes are tough. And I'm calling them hot topics because a lot of times people don't want to talk about it. They want to face the reality of, or how do you deal with, what if your child does not want to see you? There's some birth moms don't want to see their children, so all of that is real. And everyone's different, but how can we get through this healing together? One thing I would say, and for me, and I believe for my son also, that time we saw each other for the first time, that was the beginning of both of our healings. I truly believe that. I know it is for me. And because I think you put it that way, of a missing piece of myself. For at that time, it was 45 years. So he'll be 48 in October. So all that for 48 in October, from that time of looking him in his face that first time, I still see, and that was something I said to him the day we met. I said, "You still got my eyes. You still got my nose. You still got my mouth." I could see it. I could just see it. That it was etched in my mind 45 years before I saw it when I saw him that first day.
That's amazing.
It was still there.
Really incredible. I'm excited for your podcast. I know, you and I have been working on it for a while, and
Yes.
I meant it when I said it, that it's needed. There's a lot of adoptee content out there. And my suspicion, I've often joked, but I mean this relatively seriously, that I believe there are a lot of birth mothers like you listening to the podcast, because it's like, if you've ever had children and you've driven in the car with them, they'll sit in the back seat and they'll talk to each other as if you're not even sitting there. And they'll say all kinds of crazy stuff. And I feel like the podcast is a bit of a way for y'all to listen in on us talking to each other to gain some level of perspective as to what we've been thinking and feeling. And that's part of the joy that I get from doing the show, is that I get to help other adoptees bring their voice forward, their opinions forward, their feelings forward for one another to hear and for others to learn from, be it birth mothers, non-adoptees, birth fathers, whatever the thing is. I want folks to have that. And so I'm excited for your show, because this is another piece of the story that precedes our own piece of the story. We know if reunion happens and we hear your version of the story, we hear certain parts of it and we're able to fathom certain parts of it. But to have you all talk to each other and bring out the history of how you got to this point where you found yourself pregnant, what it was like to traverse that pregnancy, be it as a community or very much alone, and what you had to endure in the aftermath of trying to understand who you are now as a woman, as well as how you are going to traverse the rest of your life with this thing that, for all intents and purposes, sort of has you in a closet. And as you said, it's not until you get to face it, acknowledge it, and reunite with the child, in many cases, that you can start to breathe again. So I'm just really happy that you have taken the initiative and are inviting women to open up with their courage to share their stories. I think it's going to be amazing.
Absolutely. And it's been such a thrill, because, I've taped some episodes, and all different. Some are reunited with their child, some are not, different circumstances of how they became mothers. And that's the joy of it, as you just said, that the diversity around it, that people are going to hear all different kinds of stories behind it and get that perspective. And I agree with you, this podcast is not only just for birth moms, for adopt, it's for everyone. And I say that for everyone, because part of it, and part of my journey of learning, number one, two, a lot of people outside of the triad, being adoptees, adoptive parents, or birth parents, don't understand the whole, I say, adoption, what people go through, and the reunion. And specifically, like when I was in reunion with my son and I shared that, and sometimes the response was, "Oh, I guess now everything is fine." It's like, is that as easy as that? So it's not like you just, you're away from your child for 45 years and now you meet them and, oh, okay, everything just immediately go.
All fixed.
Process.
Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, somebody said that, "Oh, everything's good now."
Oh, man.
Well, it is. I'm grateful. I'm blessed of that. But it's working through that and the healing.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. And understanding that whole, when you heard me say that I wrote the letter to just let the adoptive family know of the reason why that I did love my son, because I've heard this too. It's like, well, if he plays for adoption and you don't want to, or now you would understand this, Damon. What's fighting words to me that fighting words to me when someone says, you gave my baby away. I did not give my baby away. I placed my son in adoption. So that's fighting words for me. You got a fight on your hand from Yvonne. You say that to me.
Yeah, that's right. Well, good for you. I guess more than anything else, I'm glad you're able to breathe in a full way, having gone through reunion with your son. I'm so thankful that he was receptive. I know it took him a couple of years to finally sort of reconcile himself to the idea that you were out there and, you know, he is of you and that you are connected regardless. And I'm so glad that you've found a way to make a connection with him. And again, I'm really appreciative of your effort to help bring Birth Moms Real Talks podcast to the air so that people can hear some stories from some birth moms. So congratulations on getting the show going. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Damon. You've been there with me because it's been ups and downs, but you've been there, and I so appreciate you.
Of course, my pleasure. Yvonne, this was really great. I'm so grateful for your time and your openness and your candor. Thank you so much, and you take care, all right?
Okay. Thank you, Damon.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, it's me. While we were talking, Yvonne said her story is like a lifetime movie with its emotional roller coaster and her incredible lived experiences. After achieving academic greatness from rural small-town roots, Yvonne found herself pregnant and alone in 1973. She delivered her son, but didn't even see him. Yvonne saw his face 10 days later when she returned to the hospital as the only person who could extract him from maternity, and it was the first and last time she saw his face for decades. When Yvonne found him online, it took him 3 years to return her message and invite her to talk. It was that meeting with her son that allowed Yvonne to breathe again after more than 45 years. You've now heard 2 birth mother stories on the Who Am I Really podcast, and Yvonne would like to bring more stories forward. She's launching a new podcast called Birth Moms Real Talk, coming out in another week, and it'll be available wherever you get your podcasts. I've heard one of the episodes of Birth Moms Real Talk, and it was enlightening to hear the experience of another birth mom besides Anne-Marie and Yvonne, my guests. And there are so many more stories to come. To the birth mothers listening, I hope you'll subscribe to Birth Moms Real Talk podcast and join the Facebook community to support one another. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Yvonne's story that inspires you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I, really?